And let us say good evening. And then return to our subject of treatment. We have been told that it profiteth you nothing to pray for your friends, you must pray for your enemies. We have been told that you must love your neighbor as yourself. And so it is that in all of our classwork, students are told that not only it is a duty, but also that it is a matter of individual growth to set aside one meditation period each day for the benefit, we will say, of the world. That means not your family or my family, not your community or mine, not your religion or mine, but for these world problems. And so you may have a problem, as would be suggested in our press, of the infiltration of schools and churches and governmental institutions of communistic activities, and you will certainly want, in the interests of your own freedom, safety, security, and that of your family, you will want to see these situations corrected. And if you devote this period every day, it may be one day to this infiltration of communism, it may be another day to this threat of inflation, it may be another day to the problem of these labor union discords, inharmonies. It may be that some matter of international affair has come to light, causing concern, anxiety, something like this recent Cuban situation. Recent, in fact, it's on now. And each day you may take at least one of those and ask yourself the question, whence come they? Where do they originate? Where do they have their source? And you must be careful never to personalize, because if you do, you lose all of your effectiveness. In other words, the moment you blame it on Russia or Stalin or Khrushchev, you'll find yourself the next day having to deal with a Hitler. And if you begin to personalize it and blame Hitler, pretty soon you'll find you have Mussolini. And if you personalize that, the next thing you know, you're going to have your own president trying to destroy the Supreme Court, or destroying the powers of Congress and making it a must Congress without authority. And you left with a totalitarian form of government, and you will have brought it on yourself, because you had not learned the secret. The secret is never to personalize. Mr. Stalin was never responsible for any of the evils in Russia, nor is Mr. Khrushchev now, nor was Mr. Hitler, or Mussolini, or Roosevelt. We call these the four horsemen of the apocalypse only to impersonalize them, not to personalize or put the responsibility on their shoulder, but to show that it is just the impersonal activity of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, meaning the impersonal seed of error, finding an outlet wherever an avenue is opened to it. Now, these men who are we'll call them the fronts for these evils, they're not responsible. They're only tools. They're no different than these union labor leaders who break any law and every law, up to and including murder, and get away with it. It would be folly to blame them, because if you put them all in prison, they'd be succeeded by someone they have trained. There's no use putting them in prison. There's no use putting them out of office. That isn't going to end it. What you have to do is recognize the evil and then impersonalize it. Realize that these evils have their source in an impersonal source, which we call carnal mind or mortal mind, and then realize that since carnal mind or mortal mind is not of God and has no law of God, that these evil powers and propensities and activities are not power. Then you'll find that rather than just take an evil person out of office and replace him with one who may be twice as evil, that you will aid in correcting the situation. The longer you personalize, the more difficulty you are going to have with life. And the same thing is true when you are healing. Any time that you start to blame your patient, or your patient's mother-in-law, or your patient's neighbor, or your patient's religion, be assured that you are just putting your foot in a barrel of molasses, and you're going to get stuck and hard. To heal, you must impersonalize. You must know that any and every form of evil has its source in that impersonal, carnal, or mortal mind. And because of that, it is the arm of flesh, or nothingness. No power, because only that which emanates from God is power. You can look right at Pilate and say, "Thou couldst have no power over me, unless it were given thee of God." And so you can look at any and every form of error and realize the impersonal nature of it as having its source in the devil. Universal belief, the belief in two powers, give it any names you like. But then realize that all of this is but the arm of flesh, or nothingness. And it's nothingness because it does not have its foundation in God. It does not have a law of God to sustain it. Now, when you take up any of these world problems in that way, let us take, for instance, the summit conference, which may soon take place. Don't personalize it as if there was a good side and a bad side. Don't personalize it as if there were a right side and a wrong side. Don't personalize it as if there were good men going to that conference and bad men, because you have absolutely no power in the situation whatsoever. You might just as well have gone out and enjoyed a movie or sat home with your television. But if you will take a period each day and realize that God is the only activity of any conference, God is the intelligence of a conference, God is the intelligence and the love, God is the wisdom and the judgment and the direction. God is the mind of every individual at the conference. God is the only law at that conference. God alone is recognized as individual being, and the law of God governs. And the rule of God is the only rule, and the arm of God is the only power. Anything claiming a power apart from God, anything claiming a power of evil, is but the activity of the carnal mind. Mesmeric suggestion, universal belief. And because it does not have its source in God, it has no outlet, no inlet. It has no person in whom, on whom, through whom to operate. It is completely impersonal. And because it is not of God, it has no power. Then you would find that you have become the greatest power in your community. You have become the greatest power in your church or in your school. You have become the greatest power in your nation. You can even be the greatest power in the world, because one with God is a majority. And if there are 10 righteous men in the city would be saved. And so if there are a few of us, or a few dozen, or a few hundred, giving specifically a period of our time to the realization of the impersonal nature of evil, you will find how affairs begin to change. Now, we in the Infinite Way have a group of students all around the globe and all around the clock. There isn't a single hour of the 24 when there isn't a group of our students somewhere in the world doing specific work of this nature. Of course, it's a small group because we can't ask anyone to do it specifically and regularly until they have come to a place where they have the time and the willingness and the love of God and man to give a specific time each day to that impersonal work. And when we find such a student and they have enough freedom from their family duties or business duties so that they can give and will give and dedicate themselves to at least one period, or is it three? 3 periods. 3 periods every day this group gives to this impersonal international work. And they take up not only international problems, but their local problems of this nature, their schools or their churches or their community government or state, nation or international. They even take up cyclones and tidal waves and any other threatening forces of nature. And, of course, only they know to what degree they are a power in this world, in changing the world. Of course, work of this nature must be done secretly and must be done sacredly, because the world would never understand the nature of a work like this. And therefore those who undertake it must understand that they are never going to receive credit for it. They are never going to be hailed as the one who brought peace on earth or saved the world, because work of this nature is done quietly. You can't go out the next day and tell the newspaper that you warded off the hurricane. They wouldn't believe you. And yet it might be absolutely true, and often has been. But the point is that those who are on the spiritual path aren't on it for glory, for reputation, for profit. They're on it because there is an urge from God within. There is a drive within them that will not give them rest. And so they end up in work of this kind. will one's consciousness evolve more rapidly if, in living this life, one makes great sacrifices of both one's energy and supply for their fellow man? And can one expect to enjoy a higher plane of existence in the next? No, all of that caters to egotism. It all caters to the ego. Look what a great fellow I am. Look what I have done for you. No, no, no. God has no pleasure in your sacrifices, and man won't thank you for it. No, no. It is quite a different thing if a person has received a, let's call it, a mission from God. Take, for instance, Mr. Schweitzer, Dr. Schweitzer. That is quite different. Dr. Schweitzer has no sense at all that he is sacrificing his life for anyone. On the contrary, he knows that he is fulfilling his life. For to him, the work that he is doing is fulfillment. And if you took it away from him, he wouldn't live long, and certainly wouldn't live happily. So he would laugh at the idea that his life has been a sacrifice, when actually it has been a fulfillment. And so it is that those whom I have met, more especially in the spiritual work, I have never yet met one who had the feeling that they were sacrificing anything for anyone. All of them have the same feeling that they themselves are being fulfilled. And the benefit that the world gets is incidental to that. For they are doing it for the fulfillment of their own soul, the fulfillment of their own inner life. Now, when one does that, one is not sacrificing. And it makes no difference then if one is working 20 hours a day and giving away every dollar they earn. It is still no sacrifice, because it is only done as a fulfillment, and you might say under orders. And that gives us, of course, this whole idea of consciousness. When consciousness gives us a work to do, it gives us that work to do in order that we may be fulfilled. And it doesn't give it to us to do to sacrifice or to make things easy for someone else at our expense. It isn't for that reason, even if it works out that way. The reason always is our own fulfillment. And what we do fulfills us. Everyone who is functioning on the spiritual level of life is fulfilling an inner urge. They are fulfilling some mission that has been given to them, and therefore their life is a fulfillment, even if to the outside world it appears to be a sacrifice. I'm sure that there are lots of people in the public world who believe that Dr. Schweitzer is sacrificing or has sacrificed, but they didn't get that from him. His answer would be, well, if I weren't doing this, what would I be doing? Twiddling my thumbs, or dancing around some dance hall, or sitting in a bar? I'm afraid that this gives me more pleasure than that. And that would be his answer. I am doing that which gives me the maximum of pleasure, and I'm doing it because I don't know anyone or anything else that I could be doing that would give me this much satisfaction. That would be his answer. So I will say no. Rather than think of doing something for someone else, the higher form of demonstration is to forget the world and think only of attaining your own highest consciousness. And then let follow what will. In other words, until one has this higher consciousness, one has nothing to give the world spiritually. Or we would say even, let's take the subject of teaching. Supposing a teacher went into school to teach before they had attained the ability to teach and the knowledge. Well, you'd say that couldn't be. They'd have nothing to teach. Well, so it is with our work. Let no one think that they have anything to give the world until they have attained the conscious realization of God. I'm speaking now of giving to the world spiritually. No one has anything to give the world spiritually until they have attained conscious union with God, conscious realization of God, or conscious communion with God. Then, when they have that, they are at the same time given their particular mission to perform. The secret of life is in the word consciousness. Just because the child has complete intelligence, you don't send it out to conduct a business or a profession. Why not? It has all the intelligence, yes, but it hasn't yet the knowledge, the preparation, the experience. So it is in the spiritual life. Everyone potentially has that mind which was in Christ Jesus, but you won't heal anybody with it. You won't teach anybody anything spiritual with it. Not until you have attained the conscious experience of God, the ability to consciously commune with God. Then this that takes place because of the communion does your work for you. And that is why it is said, He performeth that which is given me to do. Once you have attained conscious union or communion with God, then that He, that spiritual consciousness, that presence of God, it performeth the work, and you become only the instrument. Therefore, the answer is yes, it is just as well to realize one's oneness with God and relax. And stay relaxed, but while relaxed, continue meditation and study diligently, seriously, until the experience of actual communion with God takes place. And it is an experience, and it takes place at a specific moment. You may have lived all of your life up to this moment without a communion with God, and then in this very instant feel the presence and with that know a contact has been made. Then whatever you're called upon to do will be performed through you because of that contact. The government will not be on your shoulder, it will be on the shoulders of that Christ. That is why Paul could say, I can do all things through Christ. But then remember, he had attained Christ. He had attained communion with Christ. He had attained union with Christ. He had attained the experience of the indwelling Christ, so that he wasn't making an affirmation. He wasn't indulging a cliche. When he said, I can do all things through Christ, it was because he had had the Christ experience, and it was there, and he could draw on it. So that also he could say, I live, yet not I. Christ liveth my life. You can only say that after you have had the experience of Christ. There is such a thing as a Christ experience. That means there is a moment. The moment first in which you are just your own human self. And then that next moment when all of a sudden you realize there's something else. There's something else. There's something within me. Something is talking to me. Or something is showing me something. Or something is revealing itself. There's another. There's a something within me. And when the experience is over, you will realize that the Christ, the Spirit of God in man, has been consciously realized. Now, from that moment on, this Christ, if you'll give it the opportunity, the Spirit of God in you, this infinite invisible, will begin to live your life. Not fully, not completely, because with this first experience, it is, it is almost like the stage of infancy. You can live, but you can't yet do much more than live. And with this first experience of the Christ, you know now that you will do things that you could not do heretofore. You will understand things that you have never understood before. But it may be a little bit today, and it may not happen again for a week or a month. It may not happen for 6 months. And then it might happen 2 days in a row. And then it may not happen for another week or 2 or 3 or 8. And then it may happen once or twice or even 3 times. And so it is, little by little, you have these periods of communion, and each time you get stronger in Christ, because you find that the Spirit within you performs much more than you do. Now you can see by the effects that there is something going before you to make the crooked places straight. There is something going before you to make your path harmonious. There is something going before you that sells your merchandise for you, or produces your art or your literature for you, and you stand off and look at it and say, I could never have done that. And then you know that it performed it for you. And then you begin to understand those passages. He that is within me is greater than he that is in the world. He performeth that which is given me to do. He perfecteth that which concerneth me. And I and my Father are one, but the Father is greater than I. And so you come gradually into living, you might call it a double life, because it's a life hidden from the world. You wouldn't dare tell anyone about it. You just wouldn't dare. They'd begin to wonder if you were cracking up. And if you had an estate, they'd start to think about how soon they could arrange to have somebody take care of it for you. You cannot tell anyone, not anyone, when you begin to have this experience. It is something you have to hug within yourself. Oh yes, if you have a teacher and you are working with a spiritual teacher, you can always confide in that teacher. Be careful, however, that it is a spiritual teacher. Be careful that it is someone who you know has had the experience and is living through it. Otherwise, don't ever let anyone know that you are having or have had this experience. This is something so sacred that it can only be shared with God, and if you have a spiritual teacher who has been in any way responsible, you can share it with them. Now, as you silently and let's go back for a minute to the Master in Matthew, where he tells you that do not pray to be seen of men. Go into your sanctuary and pray in secret. And the Father that seeth in secret will reward thee openly. Always when you pray, always when you meditate, always when you have communion with God, with the Spirit within, do it sacredly. Do it secretly. Keep that locked up within yourself, and the Father that seeth in secret will reward thee openly. And that secrecy continues and is never violated, except if you become a teacher on the spiritual path. Then at certain times you will feel that you have been given the liberty or freedom of telling things to your student in order to help them in their development. But aside from that, unless you know that you are imparting something sacredly and secretly, do not impart it. If it seems to cheat the other fellow of a blessing, rather that they be cheated than that you be cheated. Because never believe that by giving away something sacred that you bless anyone. You only bless those who can receive it. Never believe that you could go before a public and say these things to them with any idea at all that it would bless them. More likely, it would set up ridicule. Matter of fact, we had that happen in Honolulu last summer when Dr. Suzuki, the Zen author, gave a most sacred Zen statement to this gathering of philosophers who had come from all over the world. And the next day the newspapers just ridiculed him as if he were about ready to be locked up. And that's about all the good it did to give this pearl to the swines. So it is with you. You have no right to give your sacred inner secrets, your inner relationship with God, your communions with God, that which you witness God do for you. Don't give testimonies about it. Don't let anyone know it, in fact. And if someone does notice it and speak of it, say, oh, well, yes, and pass it by, because you will be giving your pearls where they're not understood or wanted. And so it is that you share only with your teacher, or when you become a teacher, you share with those students who you feel to be ready for the deeper and more sacred things. Now, as you come to these periods of communion with God, you will for the first time discover the secret of Jesus Christ. He had a secret, and it is in the Scriptures, but the world doesn't know it. And the reason is that you never can know the deep things of God with your mind. You can only know them through this inner spiritual light, the spiritual discernment that throws a light on Scripture and on all mystical truth. And this is the secret that you will discover. And you are not to go out of this room and talk about it. When your friends or your relatives are ready for it, they'll be in this room. I have meat, ye know not of. I have meat, the world knows not of. This is the great secret of life. You have within your consciousness, as a matter of fact, it is your consciousness that is your meat. It is the eye of your being. that is the meat and wine and water and resurrection of your life. And when the Master says, I will never leave you nor forsake you, he was not talking about Jesus. He was talking about I. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Now, silently within yourself, say the word I. Softly, gently, slowly say the word I within yourself. And now remember that Jesus said that I will never leave you. If you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will be with you. I am the meat and the wine and the water. I am the resurrection. I am life eternal. And then the poet says, closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. Is there anything closer to you than breathing than I? Only I is closer to you than breathing. Why? Because I is your true identity. And therefore, when you hear, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee, rest in the assurance that this is true, that this I in the center of you is your true identity. It is the Son of God in you. It is that which Jesus called the Father within me, he doeth the works. It is that which Paul called the Christ. I can do all things through Christ which dwelleth in me. Christ which dwelleth in me. That Christ which dwelleth in you is I. That was the name revealed to Moses, the secret name which no Hebrew was allowed to know except the high priests. And it was the secret that sent Jesus out into the world, because the Hebrew church would not permit that name to be known. And Jesus took it upon himself to walk up and down the streets, the mountains, the valleys, the seashores, and proclaim to the people, the name of God is I. I in the midst of you is mighty. I in the midst of you is your meat, your wine, your bread, your water. I in the midst of you is God. The place whereon thou standest is holy ground, because I is there. I and my Father are one. Thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me, for the Father is closer to me than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. Within me, the indwelling presence called I. And as long as I can silently, sacredly, secretly voice within myself the word I can be assured of this. I will eat as much food every day as my body requires. I will have as much drink, as much clothing, as much housing, as much companionship, because I in the midst of me is there for that purpose, to outwardly appear as everything that I need. If it should be a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, I in the midst of you will outwardly appear as a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. If the need is for food, I within me will appear outwardly as a raven bringing food if necessary, or fish jumping up into the boat from the sea, or rain falling from a cloudless sky. Only the realization of I can do this for you. You do not know God aright until you know that I in the midst of me is God. To know him aright is life eternal. You will only know him aright when you know that, be not afraid, it is I, and I will never leave you nor forsake you. Don't look for some character outside of you to be with you eternally, for it will not be. If your mother forsakes you and your father, I will still be with you in the midst of you. Never forget that. Even if your mother and your father forsake you, I, in the midst of you, will be with you. And if only you will dwell on this truth, I, in the midst of me, is God. I, in the midst of me, embodies my food, my clothing, my housing, my employment, my companionship, my all in all. My good is closer to me than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. My good dwelleth within me, for the Father dwelleth within me. And the Father's name is I. I am He. I am that I am. I am in the midst of me, holds the entire harmony of my life and unfolds it in accordance with keeping my mind stayed on God. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on the I within me. Lean not unto thine own understanding. Acknowledge that I, in the midst of you, will never forsake you, will never leave you. Though your sins be scarlet, I will be there to turn you into white as snow. If the years of the locust have eaten away, I, in the midst of me, will restore the lost years of the locust. And the only reason that it isn't happening to the people on earth, they do not know God. No one knows God unless they have arrived at the revelation that I, in the midst of me, am He. No one knows God while they are praying outside, or up, or down. No one knows God who calls him divine mind or divine love. No one knows God who gives God any name. For all those names are just concepts in your mind. They're not God. They are concepts which the human eye is evolving and then worshiping. It's all right to use that for beginners, to take them away from the sense of a personal God. But eventually, every spiritual student must come to know God aright. Then, knowing God aright, you have attained life eternal. And it will make to you then no difference whether you are living that life on this side of the veil or the other side of the veil. It will make no difference to you whether you live it in California or New York. It will make no difference to you, because wherever you geographically may be is where God is. And why should you want to be any other place than where God is? And the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Joseph proved it in the pit. Joseph proved it as a slave in Egypt. Joseph proved it in prison. He proved that where I am, God is, and by holding steadfastly to that, he found himself where God ordained that he should be. Do you see why that you profane a spiritual teaching when you reveal it to anyone at all except as between teacher and student and teacher? Do you see that you bring it down to the level of a bag of magical tricks? Oh, here's a secret I can tell you that you can get things with, and then you've lost it. If that's all it means to you, you've lost it. And that's why it should never be imparted to anyone except that they are ready. When King Solomon had this secret, and he wanted to impart it to the workers on the temple, he told them that he would not give them this secret until that temple was completed and they had proved their readiness to receive and understand this secret. This secret, which when you know it, solves every problem of your life. All you have to do is keep this locked up within yourself so that you can keep your mind stayed on God, the presence and power within me, so that you can acknowledge God within you in all your ways and realize this consciousness which I am is my bread and my wine and my water. The work that I don't do for a living. I do as fulfillment, because my supply will come from God, because it's already established within me, wherever I am, with work or without work. The kingdom of God is within me, and it is not dependent on man whose breath is in his nostril. It is not dependent on princes. It is not dependent on earning a living by the sweat of the brow. It is dependent only on this: I will never forsake you. I will never leave you, and I am your bread. Therefore your bread will never leave you, nor your wine, nor your meat, nor your water, nor your resurrection, nor your life eternal. And as you know this, you will realize why you can walk up and down this world, keeping your mind stayed on the I that is within you, the I which in truth I am, the I which is my true identity, the I which is the life and soul of my being, the I which was, yes, through this I was given dominion over everything on the earth and above the earth and beneath the waters. I was given dominion. I, in the midst of me, has this dominion. I, in the midst of me. Therefore, Joel has only to be a beholder and see how I goes before him to make the crooked places straight. How this invisible divine presence goes before him to bring to him all that is necessary for his experience. Burroughs gave it to us in his poem, Waiting. My own shall come to me. I need not run around seeking, searching. My own shall come to me, as long as I know the name of God. Now the priests in the Hebrew faith knew this secret, but they were never allowed to voice this word I, unless they were inside the sanctuary, hidden away from any possibility of being overheard. And then I believe only once a year were they permitted to voice this name. This is the sacred name. I am. I in the midst of me am. I within me am. And this I within me is the infinite, invisible, divine presence of God, which makes it possible for me to say, the place whereon I stand is holy ground. so you will see how foolish competition looks in the face of that. So you will see how foolish communism looks. The idea that we have to divide up what we've got so we'll all have it, when we have I in the midst of me, which multiplies the loaves and fishes. If there aren't enough, I in the midst of me will multiply loaves and fishes without borrowing from somebody else or without taking from somebody else. I in the midst of me. And so you will see that not only your own shall come to you, but nothing can in any wise be taken from you. And if something out here in this world of baubles is taken from you, nothing has been taken from you. Because baubles don't count for anything. Baubles are nothing, whether they're dollars or diamonds. They're nothing because I is the multiplier. I is the source of infinity. And so what happens to these baubles out here is of no consequence. Give them away, enjoy them, share them. And if somebody thinks they need them so badly they want to steal them, bless them. For I in the midst of you will multiply and multiply. Only know him aright, and you'll find life eternal and everything necessary to support that life. That is what makes the spiritual path so practical. You don't have to take thought for what you shall eat or what you shall drink or wherewithal you shall be clothed, because this heavenly Father within you, he knoweth you have need, and it is his good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Can you imagine that? Once we learn to relax and to realize that God is closer to us than breathing, it is the very word I. From then on, there's nothing to fear, because now you can say, any evil that is aimed at me is not aimed at me, it is aimed at God. Let God take care of it. Let God dispose of it. Let God, in the midst of me, handle it. Nothing that is ever sent against my house, nothing that any evil that tries to enter my household must drop dead, because it is not aimed against me, it is aimed against God, and I'm not picking up the sword to fight it. I'm letting I in the midst of me dissolve it in whatever way it will. That is what makes the mystical life so practical. God is. And through our inner contemplation, through our meditation, through our inner communion, eventually the presence of God comes alive. And then you have a real communion and not merely a cliche or an affirmation. It is a live experience. At this point, you may say, doesn't that make two? Isn't there a God and a me? And the answer is, in one sense, yes, but in the real sense, no. It isn't two, because we acknowledge that I and the Father are one, but this inner I which I am, this inner self, is greater than that which is called Joel, which is the outer. In other words, God, the I of me, is the Father. Joel is the Son. And therefore it is legitimate for Joel to commune with the Father and the Father to commune with Joel. And yet there be not two. The one is the inner invisible, and the other is the outer visible appearing of the inner invisible. And therefore the Master says, thou seest me thou seest the Father that sent me. Hast thou been with me so long, and hast not known? And so it is. You'll find that someday this that is within you will say to you, have I been here in the midst of you so long, and you haven't known? I, in the midst of you, am your God.